So thanks again for coming. And this event, Self-Care in the Time of COVID, is the second event run by the Creative Practices Education and Wellbeing Network. So that's a transdisciplinary project that we kicked off in 2019, and the network aims to address health and well-being through art and design practices, pedagogy and cultural engagement. And I think that's what really sets us apart from some of the other arts and culture and wellbeing groups which are around at the minute, is that we're really keen that pedagogy is key to the research mix. So as a research network, we recognise that health, and particularly mental health, become a pressing concern within higher education. And there's a growing body of evidence at the same time that arts, culture and creative engagements can help promote well-being. And for me, this is the paradox of UAL. We live, eat and breathe the very thing which is described as maintaining positive mental health in the general population. And yet many of our staff and our students are still struggling. So this event today follows up on our conference, which we ran in 2019 and which we called On Vulnerability and Resistance. Now that conference touched on a number of themes identified by this network as being of importance. These included activism and the power of biography and autobiography in the healing process. But it's probably fair to say that the 2019 conference was very much about setting the scene and looking at the wider context of wellness and illness. And today, really in response to the extraordinary events of the last year, we're going to be turning inwards and thinking about the environment around us here at UAL. So we're thinking about our students and how we help to protect them when they're negotiating tricky territories. We're thinking about our academic staff and the prevalence of burnout, which was a big issue even before COVID-19 entered the mix. We're thinking about our staff and students of colour, or those who identify as LGBTQIA, who we know face additional challenges and whose mental health suffers accordingly. And we'll be thinking about how UAL as an institution recognises and seeks to address these issues. So we've got a great programme lined up for you today. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to be hearing from Rotimi Akinsete, who is going to be talking about the university's Wellbeing Action Plan. But we do have Sarah Campbell and Nikki Nicolai from UAL's Counselling and Health Advice Service, and Amberlee Green, who's a mental health advisor at UAL. And between them, they will be constituting really the first part of the conversation today. So that's very much about what is happening in UAL and what support we can give to our students and what support we can find for ourselves. And I'll be hosting a Q&A after that. We'll then take a slightly longer break. And after that, we'll be hearing from Maria Walsh, who'll be talking about her new book, Therapeutic Aesthetics. We've been having some connection issues with Maria, so it's just possible that we might opt to switch to a Teams link if we're really struggling with Blackboard Collaborate. So just a few housekeeping things to discuss. So I don't know whether you're all dyed-in-the-wool Blackboard Collaborate users or whether you're fairly new to it. If you're new to Blackboard Collaborate, you'll find in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen a small purple arrow with a sort of double arrow icon on it. And if you click on that, you will find that you have access to a list of attendees in the room and to a little speech bubble, which is where you'll find the chat. So I find the chat really useful whenever I'm attending events, either because you can pop in questions for the speakers, and when it comes to Q&A, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat to see whether there've been any queries for coming from the room. I also find the chat quite useful because sometimes I feel like what I have to say isn't significant enough for me to raise a hand and ask the whole group to listen, but sometimes I have musings or maybe web links that I can pop in the chat that I think the rest of the listeners might find useful. And then in the center bottom of your screen, you'll find a number of icons. One is your microphone and your camera. Please make sure these are switched off while our presenters are presenting. And then there's a little raised hand icon. So when it comes to Q&A time, if you want to click on that icon, you can raise your hand and I'll see that you would like to speak. I've already mentioned that we're going to be recording the event today, so I think that covers everything in my list of housekeeping. I guess you all know where your own toilets and escape exits are, so that's not something I have to cover today. So I'd like to move on then and introduce our first speakers of the afternoon. So Sarah Campbell and Nikki Nicolau are from UAL's Counselling and Health Advice Service, and they both have a wealth of experience. Sarah is a trained social worker and she manages the university's mental health offer, while Nikki is a trained counsellor. She's a senior counsellor here at UAL and she manages the university's counselling offer. I beg your pardon. So if I can hand over to you, Sarah and Nikki, and I will share your presentation. Bear with me just a moment. There we go. Can I just check again that everybody can see that presentation okay? If you can pop a thumbs up in the chat, that would be great. Super. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Sarah.
Lots of thumbs up. Yeah. Okay, should we make a start?
Yeah.
Hello everyone, Sarah and I are here today to give you a presentation on supporting students with mental health issues and what is available at UAL. Just to introduce myself, I'm Nikki Nicolau and I'm the Senior Counsellor within the Counselling, Health Advice and Chaplaincy Service, and I'll hand over to my colleague now.
And yes, I'm Sarah Campbell, and I'm Nikki's counterpart within the mental health advice team within the Counselling, Health Advice Chaplaincy Service. So as Nikki said, we're here to do this presentation to think about how we can support students with mental health and, you know, what else is available in UAL. So cracking on, and I have to apologise, I'm not that fluent with Blackboard, so if I struggle a little bit, that's just me getting my head around it. So to begin with, this is a very quick overview of what is available for students within student services at UAL. We're going to go into this a bit more in detail further on, but to sort of give everything in a nutshell at the moment, the Counselling, Health Advice and Chaplaincy Service, what we offer is we offer counselling for personal, emotional and psychological issues that impact on student functioning, engagement with their studies, support to help students with transition and adjustment to being both in higher education and in London, assessment and management of risk-related suicide and self-harm, advice and support for emergency mental health concerns, enduring complex mental health conditions and responding to crises and breakdowns. So, for example, things like psychosis, self-harm, eating disorders, severe anxiety, depression, and many other complex mental health issues. We help students access things like NHS support and help coordinate their support with NHS teams. We offer support for long-term physical health conditions as well, things like counselling, HIV, epilepsy, diabetes, and support for spiritual and faith issues. Within student services and relevant for supporting students with mental health is we also have the disability service, who arrange adjustments and support for disabled students, for those students that are identified as disabled under the Equality Act. So they offer support for students with long-term mental health conditions, dyslexia and other specific learning differences, sensory impairment, physical impairment, autism and neurodiversity, and long-term conditions that can impact their day-to-day life. Student advice, this might not sound like a typical go-to about supporting students with their mental health and wellbeing, but actually finances and immigration issues can have a really large, cause quite a significant psychosocial stresses on students and can have a negative impact on individuals' mental health and wellbeing. So the student advice team is really important because they provide support relating to fees and funding, but also advice and guidance about UK visas and immigration. And the last thing that the university offers is the mental health first aid network. Okay, and some of you here might already be a mental health first aider, so you probably know all this, but just to sort of recap, so the primary role of a mental health first aider is to administer mental health first aid to any person, this staff and student, suffering with mental ill health who may be presenting in immediate distress within a UAL college site. Okay, the aim is to preserve life where a person may be at risk of harm to themselves or others, provide help to prevent the mental health issues from becoming more serious before professional help arrives, promoting recovery and good mental health, providing comfort to a person during a mental health crisis, signposting to appropriate mental health services, whether within the university or externally, raising awareness of mental health issues in the community, and reducing stigma and discrimination. Okay. So we appreciate that you've come here to expect to learn more about what supports are available here within UAL. However, we feel it's important to acknowledge your role and how important it is for students going through difficult experiences, but also to know your limits, and your boundaries. So it's not just about giving more support, but knowing where the boundaries are and when not to engage with support. This is not the same as being unsupportive. You can get too many people engaged with supporting one student, which can take up all the student's time. So tutors, although not exclusively, are often the first point of contact for students, especially in the first term. But increased expectations of staff make it difficult to dedicate a lot of time to students. There are, however, some things staff can do to make sure these struggling students don't become isolated or slip through the nets. So in this case, the university has invested in various mental health and wellbeing based services in the university and chaplaincy that can provide a level of pastoral care and mental health support. However, it is not always possible for these services to know who requires support if the students don't actually come forward. Often the staff who have the most contact with students are the tutors and are the ones who notice the changes, or the students are more comfortable disclosing to them in the first instance. So we wanted to give a few tips when in these situations, when they occur, how to feel comfortable and safe using boundaries, and where to signpost and get help. Okay, so try to be empathetic and approachable, and remember that a student's facade may not reflect how they're really feeling. Academics are oddly placed with respect to their students and pastoral well-being. University students are adults, and the duty of care that academics have is often perceived as more informational than hands-on. That said, students also need human connection in their tutors. Being able to acknowledge that a student is currently having difficulties and providing empathy is important. You are not expected to deal with every problem a student has, but it is important that they do not become isolated. Okay. Students shouldn't feel like they need to be, staff shouldn't feel that they need to be expert counsellors. However, our tip is don't be afraid of tears. If a student approaches you, it's because they think you can help. So spare some of your time, however busy you are. Maybe just keep a box of tissues in your office just in case, worst case scenario. We have an incredibly busy workload, and it's quite difficult to drop everything and focus your attention on one student who comes knocking at your door. But if you can do that just for 5 minutes, it makes all the difference. Students will then be more able to open up to seek support in the future. Little things can make a huge difference to students who are experiencing issues. A brief discussion on how to sort of organise for upcoming deadlines, a short-term meeting to check progress, and contacting other lecturers whose assignments the student may not be able to hand in on time, helping them to get in contact with appropriate support services in university. Okay. And it's really important. It's really important to know your limits. Okay. There are people trained to help with different issues that can impact on students. So make sure you can provide a confident plan of action, which includes not just you being you, but also those who can help outside the student's academic life. What you can't do is offer counselling, advice, or medication, or deal with them, or help them deal with their issues long-term or outside your professional realm. So encourage them to contact or refer them to university counselling, health advice, and chaplaincy service, and other student services available to them. So basically, it is easy to lead students into relying on your support permanently and excessively, something that neither helps yours nor their well-being. You can help them deal with things, but you can't deal with their problems for them. Okay.
That takes us on to psychoeducational and well-being. The service has this academic year, developed our psychoeducational workshop programme. There has been a really good uptake from students attending these workshops and our wellbeing programmes, that we've even been required to add a few extra sessions on particular workshops such as procrastination and perfectionism. So we offer a varied workshop, as you can see from the slides, as we've been offering coping with bereavement and loss, procrastination, perfectionism, sleep, eating healthy, feeling good, feeling the blue, imposter syndrome, strengthening relationships. What we've also offered as a service this year is therapeutic art groups. And in the therapeutic art groups, we offer two varied ones. We offer a closed therapeutic art group and an open therapeutic art group. And art therapy really offers a meaningful start to point to enable conversations about feelings. Art therapy uses art to explore complex emotions or experiences that may be difficult to put into words. It encourages these feelings so they can be thought about together. This space is a confidential space that we offer to students. It can be conscious or unconscious material that may be revealed within the artwork. So, you know, what we will encourage you to do is maybe remind students to look on our website and see what workshops are going on. As a result of the pandemic, last academic year, towards the end of last academic year, we began to offer wellbeing and question and answer wellbeing sessions, basically. This has been really good. We've gone into lectures, to various courses, and just really talked about the fundamentals of really taking time to look after oneself and how one is coping right now with this pandemic. So they've been really useful, and there's obviously other workshops that are offered by the Student Union, as well as our chaplains who offer guided meditation workshops. Just going to move on. Okay. So we've got mental health advisors. Do you want to do this, or shall I?
No, sorry, I just muted myself. Sorry. So we offer mental health advice as part of the service, and the mental health advisors, we're sort of a mixed bag of mental health professionals from various different backgrounds, including mental health nurses, social work, occupational therapy, psychology graduates. So we've got a bit of a mixed bag. We provide comprehensive assessment of mental health and risk. We offer one-to-one advice, information, and emotional practical support for students. And these can be sometimes as a one-off or ongoing. It depends on what the student's individual needs are and individually what the students want. We refer to and we liaise between the university and statutory and non-statutory services supporting our students. So that's things like the NHS. And we complete detailed reports and referrals. And we do, quite often we'll work alongside those services to be able to support students' mental health within the university. We provide consultation to staff regarding students' mental health, and we, alongside the counsellors, we do things around mental health promotion, events, publication workshops, staff training, and one-to-one campaigns. What we don't do, just to sort of, because it feels that we sometimes do quite a lot, is we can't diagnose mental health conditions, but we can provide opinion and recommendations and referrals. We can't prescribe medication. That has to come from a medical doctor. We're not provide emergency service, and we don't provide an outreach service, so we can't go to students' homes where they're living.
Okay, the counselling service is there for students who wish to talk in confidence about a personal, psychological, mental health issues. It's a space to gain clarity about feelings, understand issues in a different way, and think about how to move forward. As a service, we offer brief confidential counselling. This includes as well cognitive behavioural therapy. Some of the areas in which counselling can help with is course-related problems, as helping one to function on their course, help them with that. Low mood depression, anxiety and stress, relationship issues, bereavement or loss, sexuality and gender issues, family issues, loneliness, day-to-day functioning. I'm just trying. So they're things that counsellors can help with, yeah? We also at various times in the year can help with homesickness and family issues, which I've already said, I believe. Okay, what the counsellors can't do is, because of the high demand on the service, we're not able to offer long-term therapy. We don't have the resources to do that. So what we can do, along with our colleagues, the mental health advisors, is we can help students think about where they can go if they need longer term therapy. As a service, we're not able to provide that. We've had to draw limits to being more accessible to students. And we also do not usually work with students who have specific mental health diagnosis, because again, we need to think carefully, can we help them in the brief work that we could do?
Oh, hang on.
We've gone over one, haven't we?
Yeah. It's back.
So our chaplains, the chaplaincy service at University of the Arts London offer pastoral and spiritual care to students and staff. The chaplains also organise events, activities in relation to faith, spirituality and the arts. We have 2 chaplains who are available to staff and to students, Mark, Dean and William Whitcomb. Their information can be found on the university website. Our chaplains also offer weekly meditation sessions, so it would be good to have a look at that when you get a moment. The chaplains are there to offer pastoral care is the model of an emotional and spiritual support that can be found in cultures and traditions. They welcome to be contacted by those who have a faith, but also by those who perhaps do not align them to any faith. So you don't have to be religious to contact Mark or William. Please have a look at their website, because they are available both to staff and to students.
Okay. Over the pandemic and the lockdowns, we've introduced virtual drop-in sessions for students. So these sessions are really helpful for students that have queries that need quick answers and not really want to wait too long for an assessment appointment. These are sort of ideal for students who have a brief query or who want to find out more about support. For concerns that benefit from fuller assessment, we would book in a further assessment appointment with the student afterwards. And our drop-ins, we run these Monday to Saturdays during term times. So the service operates Monday to Saturdays term times, and students, if you direct students to our main page on the UAL website, the drop-in, there is a tab there for students to be able to book. Okay. We also offer, we have a duty worker every day who's there to sort of work around urgent support for students. Again, it operates Mondays to Saturdays, 9 to 5. Outside of term times, it's Mondays to Fridays. So if you have an urgent concern about a student or required what we call a no-named consultation, which is basically the student hasn't sort of given you consent, but you have concerns and you need to discuss this with somebody, we would ask that you contact us. Now, at the moment, we would prefer if you emailed us, but I've added our phone number because that should be live in about 2 weeks' time. We've had a few issues with our phone line, so we hopefully should have it fixed within the next 2 weeks. So if you do contact us, we will contact you on the day. If students contact us, it's the same thing. We will contact them ASAP. And the duty worker is there as well as for people that we identify from the self-referrals, that we will make sure that, you know, if we've got serious concerns, we will try to track them down. Also, what we are available for, and you may have contacts already with mental health advisors or counsellors, but if you don't, you know, you can contact the duty worker for what we call debriefs. So if you've sort of had maybe a bit of a challenging or an unsettling experience with a student disclosing some mental health difficulties, we're available to have a conversation just to sort of help process that, because, you know, we'd rather support you with that than you sort of going home and not being able to sleep for a night.
Okay, so that brings us to how to refer to the Counselling, Health Advice and Chaplaincy Service. Email studenthealth@arts.ac.uk. If you're referring a student to us, it's always useful to put the name of the student and the student ID number. Check the student's contact details. It is important to indicate if the student consents to be contacted via the service. So that's something you really do need to check out with the student before you ask us to contact the student. Outline your concerns. Include any information about risk. And just to go back a bit to what Sarah said, we are here if you just want to consult with us about a student you're concerned about but do not want to give a name. Our experience, and you know, this is something we've noticed over many, many years, is that students tend to engage better if they self-refer to the service. At times, you know, we're eager to do the referral for the student, but I would sometimes say stop and pause. Do you think the student you want to refer to us has the capacity to refer themselves? If they do, then encourage them to make a self-referral. If not, and you think actually it will be better if I do it for them because I'm not sure they'll do it, then that's okay, but do get their consent. It is really important. So guide students to our website, tell them there's a referral form that can be found there, and if they can fill in as much as possible, because that helps us when it comes to us deciding who best in the service is best to support the student. Okay? Lastly, what Sarah and I want to leave you with today, it's really important that you take care of yourself too. And remember, if you don't make time for yourself and looking after yourself, you can't be there for others. Or you can, but at some point, at what cost to yourself? And it is really important to set that example and be kind and make time for yourself. I just want to let you know, in case you don't know, and Sarah might be able to put this in the chat, some of the information. The university provides an employment assistance program, CIC. They offer advisory and counselling to UAL staff. It is free and it's confidential to all UAA employees. The service is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, online or on the telephone. The employment assistance program, as I said, is free and confidential. It will offer, as well as counselling, it will offer advice on legal and financial issues and personal issues. Do contact them should you need some support for yourself at any point whilst you're working at UAL. I hope the telephone number's gone in the chat.
Oh, I've put the link. I've put the link to the page.
Okay. All right, great. Well, Sarah's put the link there, and that's something you can look at some other time. But we just wanted to make you aware of that. And really just thank you for listening to Sarah and I today. And remember, your role here is also to think about students' well-being and their mental health, but know when to stop and signpost.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So let's pop some rounds of applause in the chat box. That was really, really useful. So I thought I knew a reasonable amount about what the offer here at UAL was. And I know from talking to other people that we've actually got a very robust service compared to a lot of other universities. We've got a very sizable offer with huge numbers of students coming through. But I guess I hadn't realised just the sheer extent of the programme that's on offer, and especially things like you were describing the urgent support service. I wasn't aware that there was something that we could access in short order if we had, you know, grave concerns about an immediate problem. So that was incredibly useful for me. To hear maybe a bit more of the detail, and also sadly to be reminded just the scope and depth of the problem that you're facing in your service and that we have here at the university. Just, you know, you talked about psychosis, eating disorders, students with suicidal thoughts. It's really, really big stuff. And I know that I have colleagues in on the academic side who really feel the weight of this, you know, of students who have all these problems. And of course, that's been wildly exacerbated by the last year. So I can't imagine how you've been coping with the sheer strain. But thank you so much for giving us that sort of sense of the shape and scope of the service. I'm gonna, unless anybody has any really pressing questions now, what I'm going to suggest is that we hold our thoughts, and then what I'd like to do is have a Q&A with Nikki and Sarah and Amberlee when we've heard Amberlee speak. That would be great. So I'll just have a little look at the chat. I can't see any hands up and I can't see any urgent questions going in. So thank you again so much, Sarah and Nikki. And I will invite Amberlee to take the mic. And Amberlee, you're sharing your own presentation, aren't you? So I don't have to do any admin here. So
thanks, Judy. I'm going to try and do it now and see if it works.
Great. So while you're doing that, I'll just briefly introduce you. So Amberlee Green is a mental health advisor with a wealth of experience in the higher education sector. She also holds an MSc in clinical mental health sciences. So Amberlee, it looks like your presentation is up and working.
Amazing. I was going to ask, can you see the screen?
Yep, all good.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah and Nikki, as well. It was really great to have all of our kind of offerings summarised so well. And I want to kind of add to that. What I'll be talking to you today about is looking a bit further into mental health in the research context, really, and really exploring how it might relate to our research students and staff here at UAL, but also beyond. As Judy said, I've worked in higher education for a long time now and often support research, PhD and master's research level students with this idea of balancing inspiration and exhaustion, which is the title of this session today, and looking at how basically two complete opposite ends of the spectrum, both inspiration and exhaustion, can come from the same thing. And that kind of conflict, a lot of complications arise in that respect. So I'm going to try my hardest to condense it down to time. I have run this session a few times in different settings and different conferences. The last time I ran this was for Black early career researchers at a conference late last year, and it was a 2-hour session. So I'm going to try my hardest to condense it as much as possible. I've taken out all of the activities and that sort of thing because it was longer, but I would really, really appreciate any thoughts in the Q&A afterwards, any questions you've got and any thoughts as to the things that I raise. Please do share them in the chat, because it would be great to hear people's reflections on this, as Julie said at the beginning. So let's see if I can make this work. Yes. Okay, so to begin, it's really, really important to have a conversation specifically about postgraduate mental health. So this is, I guess, a response to the fact that student mental health as a topic, student mental health, is quite a popular topic at the moment. I think in the past 10 or so years, maybe less, it's become quite a popularized topic, and I think that's in the media, it's in the news, politically as well, it's come up quite a lot. And actually what we're thinking about today is specifically postgraduates. You know, when I think about the representation of postgraduate students in higher education mental health services, so in all of the wonderful teams that Sarah and Nikki just described in various institutions across the country, postgraduate student representation is quite low consistently across institutions. And there's something there about this underrepresentation that leads to postgraduate students not always feeling like they can access mental health support in the university environment. And this is specifically for research students, because I know that taught master's students often have an experience that can be quite similar to undergraduate students, whereas research students at a postgraduate level have different timelines, they have different expectations, their deadlines often fall in complete different times to term time, which often means that term time only offerings are thinner on the ground when research students need support, for example, late summer, when there's a massive deadline for many research students. But August can often be a bit of a ghost town for some university services across various institutions. So that's why it felt really important to think specifically about postgraduate students. So what I am going to look at today is mental health in this research context, and really looking at what are the differences, what does it mean to think about your mental health in this space. Then I'll introduce this idea of exhaustion versus inspiration and what that means. And even as I talk about it, I feel like it is two parts of the same cloth. So we'll think about that. And at the end, I'll have a brief nod to what support is available, but actually we've had a really great introduction to that, so hopefully I'll be able to skip over that a little bit more. And then the paper that I have here, I'll be looking at this screen as well, sorry, because I have to make it bigger, but the paper I have here is a controlled trial actually that was looking at the mental health difficulties that can arise in PhD students. A really interesting study based in Belgium that really explored teased out what the differences are in PhD students in comparison to other students. So definitely a great read, and it's open access as well, so anyone can download it. Okay, so the impact. What is the impact of poor mental health in a research context, but then by extension, positive mental health and well-being? So of course, your mental health affects personal development. Of course, it affects how much you as a person can grow. PhDs, as we know, and research experiences at university often last so much longer than an undergraduate degree. So I often spend a lot of time thinking about just how different you might be when you enter into your PhD in the first year, and just how different you might be at the end of that. 4, 5, even more years, and how your mental health really affects your ability to develop personally. Of course, it affects your research output in terms of what you're actually able to put out, what you're able to produce, the work that you're doing. It affects your academic success and how well you do both in your PhD or in your research, but also in your career as you develop as a lecturer or develop as a teacher or researcher. And the last one, which I feel is probably the most important one, it's kind of buried in this bullet point list, but feels really important to me, which is the progress of the industry that you're working in. Because so much of the PhDs that are coming out, especially in innovative spaces like UAL, so much of the topics and the work that we're all working in, and that you as students and researchers are working in, is innovative and it's massive, and it's often contributing to the next step in your industry. It's often pushing the space that you're working in to the next level. And actually you being well, and you being here and having positive mental health is having a massive impact on the industry as it moves forward. All of the amazing findings that we have year after year are massively contributed to by you all. So being here and being well is really important. And we know that stress can exacerbate mental health difficulties. We know that already, as our zebra is showing us in the corner, particularly if there's a pre-existing physical health, mental health condition, or difficult personal circumstances as well. So this is just a bit of a nod, a bit of an appreciation to some of the additional vulnerabilities that can be present in this group. Of course, we're thinking about financial strain, self-funders. There are so many different options for funding in research and PhD students. It isn't just a kind of easy UCAS situation. There's often so much more complexity in regards to how you're getting your funding and if you're self-funding and all of that sort of thing. Of course, there's this additional vulnerability in terms of highly specialised topics. So many of the PhD students that I've supported or come across in my experience are working on topics where that they are a specialist in. They're usually the only person working in their particular niche. So unlike other student groups where you'll have 20, 30, 40 of you all working towards the same deadline with the same assignment, often researchers and PhD students, or research students actually, just to be more general, are working in highly specialised topics where it's usually just them and their supervisor potentially that knows exactly what it is that they're working on, which can limit the kind of social support that you have. Of course, pre-existing difficulties, things like anxiety, obsessive compulsive tendencies, perfectionism tendencies, and that's just to name a few. There are so many other things that if you have any difficulties with this pre-existing, things that you remember affecting you in the workplace or affecting you back when you did your BA or BSc, these kind of pre-existing difficulties can really become more inflammatory in the research space. And of course, this is amongst lots of other vulnerabilities as well. So what actually is mental health? Already in the first few minutes, I've mentioned this term mental health so many times, and I know that it's such a common phrase that we all know a lot about. But to make sure that we're all kind of singing from the same song sheet and to make sure we all have the same foundation, I thought I'd spend a few minutes actually exploring what it is and defining what mental health is. So a bit of a contradiction there because I've just used the word define and definition, but I usually tend to start with what it involves, because the term mental health includes so much, and actually it feels more accurate to me to kind of work out what does mental health involve, what can it include, rather than to kind of start with a hard and fast definition. So mental health, it is about how we feel about ourselves and the people around us, our emotional well-being. Basically, it involves our ability to make and keep friends and relationships, which tap into this idea of social skills, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to other people, how easy it is for us to kind of make relationships and kind of get on with people as we kind of go about our day-to-days. And lastly, it's our ability to learn from others, to learn from the world around us, to learn from our experiences, and to develop both cognitively and emotionally. So these are the three kind of broad things that are included when we think about mental health and having positive mental health. And then this is a definition. Over the years, this was the definition that I think aligned most with me. It's the definition that I felt encompassed everything the most, and it's from Mind. And it says that mental health refers to the workings of your mind, both in the way that you feel and in the way that you think. It relates to your understanding of yourself and the world around you. And of course, it really refers to your ability to function in everyday life. This is what mental health is. And this is a continuum of mental health. I would love, 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 if you're up for it, to use the raise hand icon, if you can, and tell me, have you ever seen the mental health continuum before? Have you ever come across this in some sort of iteration? Yes, a few of you have. Great. Okay, a few. Okay, so the mental health continuum is key. It's really important because, bearing in mind everything I've just said about what mental health includes, this mental health continuum basically illustrates the fact that all of us are on this continuum somewhere. We know this. We know that mental health and mental ill health are complete separate things. And this continuum basically demonstrates the fluidity of mental health and how easy it is for us to move across any of these axes, depending on what it is that's going on. I won't kind of go into each quadrant in depth because I know it's so self-explanatory, but what it basically does is identify the fact that you can be in the top, I don't know my left and my right, the top left quadrant, which is where you have really good mental health, at the same time as having a present mental health condition. That means that you would lie in that top right quadrant. It might be that you have no mental health diagnosis, but actually you're going through a really hard time right now. You're not sleeping well, you've got 1,000 kind of deadlines, mounting pressure, and you're feeling that your mental health, your mental well-being is quite low at the moment. So this continuum represents the fact that all of us are on this continuum in some place, but it also shows that we can move up and down it and across it really fluidly, depending on our circumstances. And this continuum I always bring up in a bid to also bring up the possibility of recovery. because whenever we talk about mental health and mental ill health, it feels really crucial that we're always talking about recovery and wellness as well, because anywhere that you are on this continuum, even if you are in the lower half and having quite a difficult time, recovery is possible and things can happen, support can be put in place, and coping strategies can be included to ensure that you're always aiming to move up the continuum in some direction. And that feels really important to underline, especially as I start to delve in next into a bigger look at this kind of idea of exhaustion and inspiration. Okay, let's see if I can move this. Okay, so let's really start to think about this idea of inspiration and exhaustion. So researchers and academic staff, as we know, are largely self-motivated. We know this. We know that working in research and working in this kind of space means that you're pretty good at working independently by nature. It's something that you are either very used to or will be really getting used to more and more as you continue to work in this space. Know that there's lots of joy, there's lots of pride and enthusiasm and momentum in academic work. We know how much joy there is around kind of really understanding and working in your research topic to the extent that you do over the years. There's a lot of enthusiasm in that. But these are the same things that have quite a few negative processes attached to them, such as overwhelm, such as isolation. This idea of working really well independently and actually being quite largely self-motivated is great, but it also can lead to feeling really overwhelmed and feeling really isolated. And this is exactly what I mean when I say that there's this massive balancing act of both inspiration and exhaustion. So what is burnout? I'm going to start with us thinking a bit more about exhaustion in the academic space. And I'm going to start with a definition of what burnout is, something, again, that we hear often. And I really like this definition for a few reasons. And then we'll look at some of the reasons why burnout is so rife in this space. And then the reason why I started with exhaustion is so that we can finish with a few self-reflective questions about inspiration that we would have done as a kind of shared space activity, but that I'd really like you to take away with you and answer. So that's why I started with exhaustion. So this definition of burnout that I've chosen, I really like. It says that burnout is a type of prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stresses on the job. It's an individual stress experience, but it's embedded in a context of complex social relationships, and it involves the person's conception of both themselves and of others. And I really like this definition of burnout, if you can like a definition of burnout, because it draws on a really important part that I think is often missed when we think about burnout and think about the exhaustion that we feel in our workspaces. It says that it's an individual stress experience. Burnout is very individualistic, and when you experience it, it is very internalized. But what's really important about this quote from this research paper is that it identifies that it's embedded in a context of basically environmental aspects that have contributed to that. And the reason why I like this is because burnout often comes with other really difficult feelings like guilt and isolation and doubt and worrying whether you're good enough to be in this space and feeling guilty about the fact that you're struggling with pressure. And what feels really important to me is that burnout isn't just the result of you and your ability to manage stress. This kind of term resilience that always comes up often is accusationary and makes you feel like it's something that you're doing wrong, when in reality burnout is often, whilst it's felt individually, it's often the result of a lot of complex things at play around you. Your relationship with your supervisor, the relationship with your peers in your space, or your colleagues in your department, your relationship with the environment that you're working in, the larger HE culture that's been around for years and years and years, which kind of leads to this kind of work kind of situation. There are so many other social and environmental aspects around that lead to this feeling of burnout, and that feels really important for me to highlight, because it shifts the blame away from you and actually highlights that burnout is part of a larger cultural situation that we all seem to be a part of at some time or other. So some of the things that I have bullet pointed here that kind of contribute to burnout or contribute to exhaustion. Of course, we have financial strain that we tapped into earlier, the idea of highly specialized topics again. There's also this look at identity. And there's lots of different things that come into identity. The idea of fitting in, whether you feel like you fit in, and that's both in the immediate space you're in, whether you feel like you fit into this kind of higher education industry, so to speak, that we're in. There's also this idea of straddling both being a staff member and being a student. Of course, if you're a research student, but also an associate lecturer and have some teaching hours that you have to do, you are sitting in within two identities at all given points throughout your week. You're always switching between two. That within itself is exhausting. It can also be exhausting when you're thinking about accessing support. We just heard a little earlier about student support and what we offer for students, and then we spoke about what we offer for staff. And of course, if you're both a staff member and a student, you might be kind of working out what support service should I be accessing. That within itself can be exhausting. Of course, you've got thoughts on career and where you want to progress and what you want to do. Feeling isolated, which I know I've mentioned a lot, but it's really important in this research space. This idea about help seeking, whether you're able to seek support in a preventative way, which is where you can feel yourself heading towards burnout and you think, actually, I have the capacity and headspace to seek support before I feel worse, or, which is the most common aspect, seeking help in a more responsive way, where you are in crisis and don't know what else to do, and then you're then faced with this idea of having to work out, where do I get support from, even though I'm in the midst of this crisis? And that's a time and money limit. I think there's lots of different things that can affect your help-seeking behaviour. This idea of self-motivating, which again is really important and probably a lot of our kind of sources of pride when it comes to being able to work in a self-motivated way. You can kind of get up and feel inspired by your work and get on with it. But that's not without cost. Self-motivating is absolutely exhausting, even if you're good at it. There's double standards amongst colleagues. I know how complex it is working in an academic space and how different it can be. I do a lot of research and work on intersectionality, and this comes up a lot when we're looking at different demographics and how double standards in this academic space can come into play in your work life. And lastly, uncomfortability, unease. That, I mean, it's so self-explanatory, but there's so much things that can happen in the environment that can lead to you having a really hard time. And I'm so sorry that I've kind of whizzed through all of that without us having the space to really talk about it and for me to kind of ask you to share more about it. But there's so much there that I'm hoping there's some familiarity with, maybe some things that you've kind of recognised, that you've seen in yourself or your colleagues before. Yeah. So having done a deep dive into exhaustion and really taking note of some of the things that might contribute to that, I really wanted to spend some time thinking about inspiration and how the things that inspire us contribute to our narrative. So this is usually an activity that we do in breakout rooms, but there are questions here that I want to kind of talk through and explore. And what I really like, if possible, is for these things to be banked and for you to take away and think about, because this is what I describe as the anchor, that, or the antidote, actually, I'd say, the antidote to all of the things that we find exhausting. So let's consider our inspirations. What is it that inspired you to choose the area that you're currently working in and researching? So when I have supported PhD students in the past and supported research students in the past, a lot of, even in a mental health capacity or mental health advice capacity even, I often try to spend as much time as possible really getting to the root of what it is that you're studying. And you can always see the kind of joy light up in someone's face when they start talking about what it is that they're researching. And when I ask people to contribute their area and what it is that inspired them to research, it's often the idea of visibility or representation, or this kind of fierce passion, or something that you've always wanted to do, this idea of researching something that's been ignored, or there's very little research in that area. So often what it is that you're researching or studying, you're often pioneering. There's not much in that space before you, and that is a massive inspiration that is often ignored when we're thinking about looking after ourselves, and we're thinking about how we start to build this plan of heading towards mental well-being or recovery. We often forget to spend our time immersed in why What is it that inspired us to work in the area that we're researching? Now, the second question often comes out of answering the first question, because we think about what are the strengths and skills that you found have benefited you in your work so far. So for example, there's so many things in your day-to-day experiences that are unique to you and actually lend itself perfectly to this research space. What are the strengths that you have in terms of your ability to, your curiosity and your ability to find the details and the information in the area that you work in, maybe better than you ever have done before? What are the skills that you have that have lended itself really well to navigating this academic space? What allows you to relate really well to the BA students that you teach, but also relate really well to the wonderful researchers and supervisors that are supporting you with your research? These kind of strengths and skills that we again often completely ignore, but we definitely ignore when we are in this exhausting period of time, when we're in this middle of exhaustion, or this kind of well where it feels like it's really hard to get out of. We often forget about the strengths and skills that we have that benefit the work that we do. And the last question, which is a really personal question, is about specific motivations that you have for pursuing your area of work. So this could be personal things that have brought you to the area that you're working in. It might be things that are rooted in your culture or your home country, for example. What are the specific motivations that have led to you pursuing this area of work? Now, these three questions are the kind of base questions when you begin to work out what is it that I need to balance the exhaustion that I'm experiencing with my inspiration. These basically are the three questions that I would pose to you to really think about and sit down and journal or write about or answer in order to start tapping into all of the things that provide the antidote for the exhaustion that we know so well and talk about so well. This idea of mental health vocabulary and being able to, actually I should have put this definition in the slides, but there's a term mental health literacy or mental health vocabulary that we probably come across in some way or another, which talks to our ability to, one, identify what it is that we need in our mental health, but also our ability to put words to it and to be able to communicate what is it that I'm experiencing and feeling and what is it that I need. And answering these questions and kind of delving into these questions often improve our mental health literacy, because we are basically challenging ourselves to identify what is it that makes me feel well and what is it that I can use as the basis for continuing work I do in this kind of pursuit of mental wellness. And remember, feeling well mental health wise is always going to be on this kind of peaks and trough type experience. It's never going to be plain sailing. There's a image that I've come across before that basically maps out recovery. I think we might have seen it before, that just shows you just how peak and trough like the experience of recovery is. And that's exactly what it is for all of us. But really thinking about and feeling comfortable thinking about the things that inspire us and thinking about it often, putting it somewhere kind of physically in front of you, can be a really good antidote to the exhaustion that we've just explored together. So I feel like I've whizzed through that. I'm so sorry that I've kind of spoken so fast through all of that. As we've just looked at, we've got lots of support on offer at UAL, as already shown in the slides before, so do tap into that. We have a really comprehensive website that I will drop into the chat afterwards that has all of the information that we need, so please do spend some time familiarizing yourself with that. And just to refer back to one of the points I whizzed through on help seeking, do think about this idea of preventative versus responsive support. And when you are in a good space, when you're feeling well, when you're feeling able to engage in spaces like this, and you're feeling able to think about your mental health and your recovery, this is a great time to familiarize yourself with the support that's available both here and externally. It's definitely worth tapping into our website, for example, now, rather than when you're in crisis, so that if you are in crisis or you ever do need support from your supervisor or from someone, you already know where to go and you already know kind of what's available here at UAL and otherwise. So if there's one thing that you take away, I would definitely think about this kind of preventative versus responsive type of help seeking. So some summary questions for us and a bit of food for thought as well, kind of thinking about all the things that we've covered today. So whilst there's a growing conversation about student mental health, there's also, especially during COVID, there's also now this very new conversation about staff wellbeing and what that means, both news coverage, but also politically in universities. What we've spoken about today and what I'm talking about is specifically for research students. So a question that I have is, where do you see yourself fitting into this conversation? Then we spoke about the academic environment and how exciting and innovative it can be. Of course, universities are a hub for kind of learning and development. But of course, this environment can have features that both worsen and improve mental health. So how do we identify and consolidate a balance for that personally for each of us? And lastly, really important question is, how do we ensure that postgraduate students feel supported in their development and in their student experience? Of course, through conversations with the research network and with Joe and colleagues, there's lots of conversation about just how important it is for university staff to know about postgraduate students and the very unique nature of your academic timeline and how that can differ. I know that can be really helpful, but this last question is a continuing question for all of us about how to ensure that we're consistently kind of developing support for you personally as postgraduate students. Okay, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. And as Judy said, around for any questions if you've got any.
Amazing. Thank you, Amberlee. So much food for thought in that presentation. So I know you were very much, I know that your role is very much in support of the postgraduate community, but I felt for research staff as well, there was so much of what you said that's really relevant. And I talked in my introduction about the paradox of UAL, which is that the wider well-being narrative is so much about the fact that art, design, culture is good for you, that it is part of the answer, and yet here we are as an institution where many of us are grappling with all kinds of stresses and strains. And I think your presentation really neatly summarized for me how it is that the thing which is supposed to be the motivator or the positive thing in your life, the thing that really makes you tick, can tip because of the stresses of needing to create outputs that are considered to be new and innovative and challenging. It can become the stick we beat ourselves with rather than the thing that brings us joy. And it did make me think, maybe we need to be thinking actually about staff as well as students about having these kind of just mental health awareness, just checking in. Are you remembering after years of being an academic that these things all still ring true? And when you tell your postgraduate students that this is what they should be thinking and how they should be behaving, are you actually hearing it yourself? And the other thing which you touched on, which I'm really interested in, so when I was trying to position myself in the wellbeing work that I do, I read a book by an academic called Frank Furedi called Therapy Culture, which was really about how neoliberalism seeks to place the responsibility on the individual. So rather than saying it's society that's screwed or it's the institution that is making you this way, it's about making the individual entirely responsible for any mental ill health. And you said something in your I think it was a definition that you offered up of burnout, where you were talking about shifting that responsibility from the individual back to the context. So I'm not talking about naming the institution as being the problem, but just the fact that we operate within this very complex series of networks. And I think that for me is maybe one of the nubs of the things we'll be discussing today, is where lies the responsibility and how do we conceptualize ourselves within that. And I know that both Joe and Maria will be touching on that this afternoon. So can I ask Sarah and Nikki to unmic yourselves and join us for a Q&A? And can I ask anybody in the room who wants to ask a question in person to raise their hand? And if anybody wants to pop a question in the chat, please do so. And maybe what I'll do while the room warms up with the things it wants to ask, I know it always takes a moment for the questions to rise to the surface. I'm going to start, because it has been a god-awful year, and I don't know how you guys have coped with the fact that things have clearly been so much more difficult than they are even in normal circumstances. But I always like to look for the light. And I wondered, so Sarah and Nikki, you were talking about the fact that you'd been offering these virtual drop-in sessions, which I can see being an amazing tool to catch people before they spiral further into a dark place. And I wondered whether that was something you'd introduced since the pandemic hit. And I wondered, so this is a question for all three of you, could you put a finger on an element of your practice that you've developed this year because of the crisis that you think, brilliant, this is something we're going to have to be doing?
Can I just ask you to repeat that again, Judy? Sorry, it sort of faded a bit on my end.
Of course, no problem. So I'll also make sure my microphone's held right up to my face. So for all three of you, I wondered, looking for the light in the last year, I know it's been a dreadful year, but could you put a finger on something in your practice that you've developed because of the pandemic, as a response to the pandemic? So it might be a mode of virtual engagement or a new way of working that you've brought in. And none of us, of course, would have welcomed the reason that got us here in the first place. But is there something that you think, yes, I'm going to take this with me when we get back to whatever normal looks like?
I would say it literally is work moving to a virtual world and doing things remotely. You know, in our sort of industries, there's always been this sort of belief that you have to have the person in the room. You have to have the person in the room to really be able to do any sort of therapeutic interaction and to really support them, because you can see the whole person and things like that. And there's always sort of those long-standing beliefs that it's trying to sort of challenge. So I know, like, we've been talking about whether this was before the pandemic, whether we should start offering some, phone or virtual sort of spaces for students, especially students that are have issues with anxiety, getting out of the house, the flats and things like that. And we were just trying to think about how we could make that work. And I think the pandemic, it sort of came along right at the right time, in a sense, for us in those discussions, because it did show very quickly that we as a service in both areas, both mental health and counselling, could adapt really, really quickly, and actually found it, for many students, actually found it really, really helpful having that response and that availability a lot quicker than having to try to coordinate their days to either get to an appointment, especially if they weren't on college sites or anything like that. So I think that was probably one of the big highlights that I would say, as a service, we were able to respond and sort of prove to ourselves that we could do something quite different, offer the same thing but in a different way.
And I just really want to echo what Sarah says there. I think if you asked us a year and a half ago, I mean, we were thinking about how could we be accessed by some students who weren't able to come physically in our premises to see us. So we were always trying to think what would work. On a personal and professional level, I never thought I could do therapy or counselling virtually. And I don't think my team would have ever thought that a year and a half ago, or the mental health advisors. But what we have been able to see, it does actually work. And there's something about students feeling if they've got a safe space to talk, they feel very comfortable in their own environment talking. There's something about, I feel they can go a little bit deeper and really talk about what's going on without perhaps adjusting to a room in a college building or at High Holborn. So that's been something that we've been able to really see, that our work is effective online. That's not to say I don't miss, or the team doesn't miss, seeing students physically in a room, because you can pick up on other stuff too, in the sense of body language. And sometimes, when students are anxious, on the one hand, they get the support virtually, but they should also be encouraged, or how do we encourage them to come out as well? But I guess it's there things as a service we will need to think about, and when we've got the space we will think about. I guess the thing that is really important this pandemic has showed is that our well-being is important, and what's really, really important, each team member, and myself included, is to make time for our own well-being. And maybe the one thing that I've taken forward with this pandemic is perhaps that actually it is really, really important I demonstrate well-being and self-care. And I think the team are beginning to recognise that as a whole.
Thank you. I have a very wise and wonderful friend who does some mental health based work in theatre, because theatre is full of practitioners who are on 0 hours contracts or, you know, bouncing from job to job. It can be quite stressful. And she always says, put your own oxygen mask on first,
Yeah,
which I
Perfectly
think is a
said.
nice way of putting it, because you can't give if you're not in a good place yourself. So, Amberlee, did you have anything that you felt had come out of the last year you wanted to
Yeah,
share?
I think that there's just been so much that we've all learned, both in a mental health service space, but also in an academic space, about accessibility and this idea of being online and how much more students can access it or otherwise. I know that in our service we have had less missed appointments, which for me personally, I found quite surprising at first. I think there was a period of time where I didn't have any appointments that students didn't turn up to, which is quite unlike face-to-face work, where you can always have something that's come up, or, you know, it's so hard. Think about you kind of mobilizing yourself and trying to get to an appointment on time, which I know we haven't all had to do for a while, but it is much more accessible in some ways. And actually thinking about accessibility and inclusion in this way, as a complete norm now, wasn't something before. So it just feels really important that we continue to think about that, and always think about things like recording things, having things available. Of course, things were recorded, but not as much as they are now, whereas now we're always thinking about accessibility. So that feels like a really important thing for us to kind of keep and take away. And then, of course, echoing what Sarah and Nikki have said as well.
Although I suppose we need to be very mindful of those people. I know in my teaching that we have students who are limping along with aged borrowed laptops or trying to do everything via their
Yeah.
mobile phone. So I guess we have to be really mindful of the fact that there are maybe a reasonably large proportion of the student body who would struggle to attend counselling sessions virtually because they literally don't
You're,
have bandwidth.
Judy, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to
Oh,
pull
now
my
I can.
mic out and put it in again.
You're on mute, I think, Judy, now. The joys of virtual spaces.
Because when I pulled my mic out and tried it again, it automatically joined me on mute. So is that better? Great. Okay. Thanks very much. So Joe, you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Is the right thing to do to show my video? I'm assuming because I'm asking a question. I hope that's okay.
Yes,
Hello.
please.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for those presentations. I thought that they were really brilliant, and I think that we are, we have been for some of us. So I was trained as a mental health first aider, which was absolutely brilliant. When I saw that as an opportunity, I did it immediately. And I had just been dealing with a student, a postgraduate student who had attempted to take her own life. So it was very difficult moment, and so I found that incredibly useful. And then I only learned later that there was also space for staff to speak to counselors if they needed support with students, and I really appreciate that that is available. So and I'm glad that you spoke about that as well. That's really important. I also think that what we're seeing in the talks today is kind of a movement from inside the academy with what is on offer, and particularly the wonderful things that are on offer in our university, though, of course. And I know that Simon Oldfield Kerr put some money into that, and I hope that the university understands that it's a priority and that you get more support. And we're slowly moving out with Amberlee's talk in relation to the environment to what Maria will be talking about, which is more the political and economic context in which we live and its relationship to mental health. And I guess one of the things that I was very interested in, Amberlee, had to do with your talk. At a certain point, you said that you had done some research and thinking around intersectionality. So, you know, discourse that has come from the legal profession, of course. I'm sure you know that. I'd like to know a little bit more about how that functions within your own research and also within your practice, really, at
100%.
UAL. So I'd love that. Thank you.
Yeah, so yes, you're right. Intersectionality was coined by a lawyer, and in the law profession, thinking about, well, it was coined by a lawyer, but now, as we know, applies to all of us in the thinking about the different ways that our social, well, different various layers of identity intersect to understand a person and their positionality. And the research I did was with another colleague here at UAL in the disabilities team at the time, and it was looking at the link between Black women in particular, me of course, and well-being and mental health, and how these things can be looked at from the lens of creativity and this kind of a creative environment exactly like UAL, and thinking about how visibility and representation and the seeing of the self in the space can improve well-being and mental health, but likewise how these narratives and controlling of narratives are often outside the hands of Black women. And it comes up a lot in the work I do with our Black students here at UAL. So there's lots of us in the team. We're a really diverse counselling and mental health team, and I'm really proud about that. This is the most diverse mental health team I've ever worked in, and I've been in quite a few, and in a few universities where I've been the only Black woman in the team or department. So we have a great team, but I have very few Black students that are referred to us, and I mean that in the context of the student population. It's kind of repeating what we're seeing in the population, and actually it comes up in my work with students all the time, because there is this idea of visibility of themselves in the academic teams. It's their idea of how they feel in comparison to their colleagues and their peers, on the course, and it comes up a lot in our mental health assessments, just thinking through what kind of support they can access when their mental health is only worsening because of their position in the university and feeling like an actual minority. And this is the kind of thing that I wish I had an answer to, but it comes up as a continuing conversation, especially this year, obviously, with the things that have happened last year and continuing this year, around what universities are doing about this, how this taps into what Judy said about this wider context of environment. I never want to feel like I'm blaming institutions, because ultimately we are part of this massive higher education culture. This is what I think about when I even spoke about postgraduate students and this kind of stress, is how universities work. We work and work and work and work. We're self-motivated. We're able to kind of, we're resilient. We're able to kind of manage anything that kind of comes at us. But in reality, especially being home, the way we have in this last year, I think this more humanistic part of us is showing, and we're thinking about how the various layers of our identity are colliding, I'd say, as a kind of term for intersecting, and how we need to work out what mental health support we need for every single layer of that identity, really. So yeah, I hope that kind of helps or kind of shares my view on that.
Thank you so much, Amberlee. So we've got 2 questions in the chat, and I'm really keen that we try and address them super fast, because I know that we've got some technical issues to sort out in the break. The first is a very straightforward question, but I don't know if it's going to be a straightforward answer. Can someone answer where the university stands on emotional support animals?
Okay. Yeah, sort of. I can sort of explain, because I've been trying to get an answer on this at the moment. At the moment, the university stance is that they don't acknowledge emotional support animals. They acknowledge service animals. So they're officially accredited with proper actual bodies to be able to work as service animals. But in regards to emotional support animals, no, at the moment, the university doesn't have a stance on that. They don't recognise it. That doesn't mean that won't change. To be honest, the best team to discuss this with would be the disability team, and probably more specifically Caroline Huntley, because that's who I often go to and ask about this if there's been any change. So she would be the best person to discuss that with.
Brilliant, thank you. Always great to be able to pass the question on to someone else. And then Jonathan Carson has posted, and I'll read it out. This is a super quick question which picks up on the paradox that I talked about. I wonder if you have observations on any lack in our habitual approach as educators in the arts to pedagogy and curriculum, i.e., are we our own worst enemy in not recognising self-care, well-being, mental health, etc., our own and others, as valuable aspects of what we should be obliged to teach? So that really does pick up on what I was saying, Jonathan, like we should all just be having mental health classes like you have driving lessons all the time, because even when you learn something, it's very easy to forget. So Jonathan asks, do we need to more explicitly see this as an aspect of developing ethical creative practice that we have a duty to encourage in our students? So any of you, if you'd like to
go on,
answer
Nikki,
that.
sorry.
No, you go, Amberlee, and I'll come in.
I was just going to say, obviously, we're probably biased because of our answer is going to be a yes. But there's this idea of just. So this, should we all just be, I think it's putting the word just before that plays down the importance of it. I think we are tapping into a whole cultural change, a whole shift from everything we've ever known, basically. So whilst we definitely should, I am so aware of how much it would basically be different to everything we've ever known before, especially in an arts educational institution. Because when you think about pedagogy and curriculum and the various different layers of art and design that we're teaching, one could say there's always an aspect of the self and identity, and self-care often does come into it. But what we don't always do is make this conscious effort to say, hang on, if we're going to think about this and think about the self, there's so much areas of art and design across all the courses here at UAL that are asking our students to tap into the self, just to create assignments. Formative assessments are tapping into the self. So what I would say is that there's this key to think about the self in the same way that we do, but to always ensure that whenever we do, we're linking that to self-care as well, and thinking about, if you're thinking about the self and starting with the self as you create all of these assignments throughout your time here, let's work out what it is that you need to support yourself as you do that, because I think the infrastructure is already there. I think we're always talking about the self. Every student is talking about how they're going to start with them to create work that's autobiographical or based on what they've seen or what they know. So I think it's there. I think it's just the next step, and just that I would get rid of the just and acknowledge it for as big a topic as it is. Sorry, Nikki.
I think there, Amberlee, I just would agree with you. And I think we have a duty, in a sense, all of us, to think about how do we encourage our students to really think about themselves. And that also means we have to think about ourselves, because it's modelling behaviour too.
Completely agree.
And it's very hard, as you said, not in, I'm thinking of the arts education, but I'm thinking culturally, but generally in this current climate where we're expected to work incredibly long hours. It's almost a done thing. No one stands back and says, why are you working all those hours? Let's think about your well-being or your mental health here, because we can't continue like that ongoingly, or we will burn out, as Amberlee said earlier on in her research.
So thank you so much to the first three speakers of the day. I feel like I've learned a great deal. I feel like I've had a bit of therapy. I've got a lot of things to think about and maybe some more tools for my toolkit. So this is a great moment for us to have a short break. I did just see a message ping up from Maria to say that she's managed to join Blackboard by her phone, and that seems to be working. So hopefully we can schedule a short break and then come back into this room and get cracking with the second half of the presentations. So I'm going to suggest it is now 3:28. Let's come back into the room at 3:35, so we've got time enough to go and make a cup of tea and stretch our legs, and I'll look forward to seeing you all shortly.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming back to the second half of the symposium. This half of the symposium is dedicated to the launch of Maria Walsh's, who's here. Yay, we can see you.
Can you?
Yeah, we can see you.
Great. Well, I can
Get a
see
good
no
look at
one.
her, just in case she disappears. Maria Walsh's latest book, Therapeutic Aesthetics, Performative Encounters in Moving Image Artworks. And Judy and I are delighted to be hosting this launch. So just a little bit about Maria. So Maria is a reader in Artist Moving Image at CCW, although she's based at Chelsea. And she is a writer on art and film with theoretical interests in philosophy and psychoanalysis. She's published extensively on these topics, so I'm going to just note three things. One is her really fabulous book, Art and Psychoanalysis, and I recommend anybody who's interested in the conjunction of art and psychoanalysis to have a look at it and to read it. It's just a wonderful book. And she's also recently co-edited the book Make Magazine, 20 Years of Make Magazine. And Make Magazine was a very, very important magazine, art magazine. So I have not had a chance to look at that yet, but I was so pleased to see that you have done something with that, and I look forward to looking at it. And of course, the book that she has most recently published is Therapeutic Aesthetics, and that's what we will be focusing on this afternoon, or at this part of the symposium. So as a means of introducing the launch, I would just like to say a little bit about the book. Therapeutic Aesthetics is a much needed book, and I would like to thank Maria for the work she has put into it and for offering it to us to read and ponder, and also for giving us the opportunity to continue to use to use her ideas and analyses in our research, teaching, therapeutic work, and personal lives. So thank you. I've spent, yes, a lot of time reading it and being very, I think it's an amazing, amazing book. So thank you very, very much. Very intense, very political, and also with moments of resistance, which I have definitely enjoyed. But continue here with my talk. Therapeutic Aesthetics offers us a brilliant analysis and critique of the psych therapies within the context of a wide-ranging engagement with contemporary art, in particular moving image work. And it does so within the context of neoliberal capitalism. And I think that's what we have seen now in this symposium today, where we've moved from inside the institution and we've slowly moved out with environment in Amberlee's talk. And now we're moving to a larger context of neoliberal capitalism. Putting forward what Walsh sees as a counterintuitive argument, she proposes that the psych therapies and their representation within contemporary art critically interrogates the more traditional model of the curative nature of these therapies. Rather, Walsh proposes that in fact, what we have at the moment is a situation that is more closely aligned with the notion of the pharmakon. An ancient Greek term taken up by Jacques Derrida and other philosophers, the pharmakon recognizes a duality within the process of healing, a duality that contains at one and the same time both remedy and poison. Thus, Walsh proposes that at the basis of her therapeutic aesthetics is both remedy or transformation or resistance and poison or toxicity. In addition to this philosophical concept, Walsh also employs D.W. Winnicott's idea of transitional space, a process taken from his work as a child psychoanalyst. For Winnicott, transitional space is an ongoing process. First negotiated in childhood, it remains present throughout one's life. Transitional space is a creative space for Winnicott, and it too is based on a duality, the destruction and reparation of certain aspects of the psyche as a means of creating a space for oneself. So what we have functioning in Walsh's book are a series of dualities. perhaps a form of irreducible ambivalences, or that's the way I came to see them, Maria, between poison, toxicity, destruction on the one hand, and remedy, micro-resistances, reparation on the other. These ambivalences are the starting points for her thinking about both the therapeutic and the aesthetic within our contemporary neoliberal context. With great deftness and nuance, Walsh takes these ambivalences forward and proceeds throughout the book to critically engage with a whole host of contemporary moving image artwork, various short-term psych therapies that are being state-sanctioned and championed at the moment, and psychological conditions that constitute the world in which we live, work, make, and view art. More specifically, Walsh considers psychological disorders that are manifest as cultural phenomena, and here she is referring to disorders such as anxiety, depression, exhaustion, burnout, and PTSD, and we've heard a little bit about those today so far. And also Walsh is looking at a host of short-term psych therapies that are being employed to deal with them, from group therapy to cathartic therapy to REBT. Her thesis is that these disorders are the result of toxic neoliberal capitalism, or what's called cognitive capitalism, and that often the state-sanctioned treatments available for these disorders function as a means of reinstating a productive and positive subject back into the labor market to continue supporting the toxic context within which the disorder was produced in and for the individual. So there's this looping that's going on that she's really trying to unpack, and that she does unpack in the book in many really significant ways. So at the same time as the welfare state is being dismantled, there is a displacement or disavowal of its, that is the state's responsibility for its society, and a lack of recognition of the neoliberal forces that produce these psychological orders. And this disavowal or displacement is moved onto the individual, and it becomes the individual's responsibility for their mental health. So the individual becomes wholly responsible for their mental health and well-being. This vicious political, social, economic, and cultural cycle of toxicity and potential remedy, only to be brought back into the fold of neoliberalism, is critically and astutely interrogated by Walsh as she moves through various contemporary moving image artworks. So I'm going to now read a bit from Maria's book, just to give you a sense of the book and her writing, and also the overall thesis of the book. And she writes so beautifully, so I'm going to do this. This is Maria. The moving image artworks that steer this book are in no way a survey of contemporary artists' work that address the therapeutic per se. Rather, my partly idiosyncratic selection enables me to put forward a particular narrative about the therapeutic as a site of cultural, not merely personal, diagnosis and resistance. In this, my case studies are part of a philosophical zeitgeist responding critically to the social, cultural, and economic impasses of neoliberal cognitive capitalism. While each chapter mainly focuses on one central case study, this is not to foreground the intentionality of singular artists, but to use their works as tools of analysis that allow me to reflect on pharmacological aesthetics as both a diagnosis of and a micro-resistance to the psychopathologies that emerge within a context of cognitive capitalism. The moving image artworks I stage encounters with range from Omar Faust's loose analogy to the talking cure in his gallery film narratives derived from the symptomology of veterans and drone pilots' post-traumatic stress disorder, to Oriana Fox's web series Chat Show, which promotes rational emotive behavioral therapy, and that's REBT, as a technique of self-improvement, albeit somewhat ironically. While these two diverse examples are linked, Walsh continues, as are all my case studies, by how they variously perform what sociologist Eva Illouz calls a therapeutic emotional style, they also signpost the development of my book's argument from a first part that takes a more overtly diagnostic critical stance towards the toxic, without denying its remedial potential, to a second half in which the curative dimension of the pharmacological takes the upper hand, without denying its toxicity. Okay, so that's the end of the quote. As we move through the book with Walsh, we become reminded of the painful cultural, economic, political, and social situation within which we find ourselves, with many people suffering from psychological disorders that are produced by the very context within which we live. We are also provided with moments of relief, with the possibility of resisting the situation and forming potential alliances to find respite from within it. Now, the conclusion of Walsh's book is entitled Toxicity and Self-Care, Two Poles of Pharmacological Aesthetics. Conclusion, it's one of those wonderful conclusions that opens up a new yet related theme to therapeutic aesthetics, to what's been happening in the book. And I believe that it is on this topic that Maria will be speaking to us today. And I think her talk is still called Who is the Self in Self-Care? So thank you very much for the book, Maria. And we look forward to your talk.
Thanks, Jo. My video went off during your introduction, so I'm just thinking it's possibly best for me to go ahead. You have to all see, you know, I apologize, but it's best, I think, if I go ahead with the mic, you know, just give a verbal talk. You've seen what I look like, and Judy will, I believe, is sharing a small PowerPoint that I've done. Is that correct?
Perfect. That's perfect, Maria. Thank you so much.
Yeah, because I can only, I can't really see much on my phone screen, so I don't know if the PowerPoint is on or anything, or if the chat is on. But I'll just wait for that to load up and just say thank you so much, Jo, for such a brilliant summary of the book. That was really fantastic, because I wondering about, you know, how to address things, and I did think that perhaps mainly a student audience today. I had taken out the key point in the book about the pharmacon. So you know, we've got that in there in your talk. So I'm not going to talk about. So I hope I'm not going to repeat what you've already said, but definitely this idea, I am going to talk about this idea of remedy and resistance in relation to self-care. And yes, well, and also just say, interestingly, Judy's reference earlier to Frank Furedi, Furedi's work about the culture of therapy was foundational also, but mainly my book is a philosophical and conceptual book. Now, so I'll just say that, well, I suppose I would, you know, so I'm very glad to hear all of those references, because I have to say that my book is not practical. It does look at the therapeutic, but it's not about art therapy per se. And in fact, it is key, this kind of what Jo referred to as irreducible ambivalences, but nonetheless about kind of how as artists and spectators of artworks, how artworks might function in a way that allows both remedy and resistance without actually being a cure. And I'll explain why that's attractive to me or interesting to me as I go through my talk. So I'm going to start now. So I think I'll just have the next slide. I can't really remember what it is now, but that's the title. Could I have the next slide, Judy? Or can I actually do it from my phone, I wonder? No. Oh, well, okay, well, I'll just continue on. So basically, is it possible to have the next slide?
Yes, so we have the Mark Fisher slide up now, Maria.
It should be the cover of the book is the second slide.
Yes, okay. Yes, it is.
There we go. We've got the cover of the book.
Oh, great. Thank you. Because I can only see the first slide. So I'm just going to, so I'll just ignore what's on my screen. Okay. So basically, I just want to say firstly that the book is not practical. And I am going to speak about self-care critically. And yes, you're quite right, Joe, that that final chapter is the conclusion is a chapter in which it's opening up onto perhaps what might be another book. But when I started this book, it was like, it's possibly 6 years ago. And since then, the discourse of self-care has burgeoned, particularly in the art world. And that's really where I guess this book is addressed to those kinds of discourses. And yes, it is about, so it's not about artists' personal psyches or spectators' personal psyches, but how moving image artworks create a particular kind of space that are expressive of social psychopathological symptoms that arise in a climate of neoliberal cognitive capitalism. Now, by cognitive capitalism, I mean a late form of capitalism in which ideas, feelings, and experiences become newly available for the extraction of value. For instance, attributes such as self-esteem and well-being, I'm not saying they're bad things, however, in this climate, they become indicators of social capital, which if you don't have them, the lack of which is seen as a personal failure. And I think this theme has been sort of addressed earlier. So, and some of these symptoms that are endemic to this particular kind of capitalism, which moves away from just thinking about labor, but moves into the psyche, and is very much about tapping into the brain and the emotions, is that we see an increase in emotional and cognitive disorders such as depression, anxiety, and burnout, amongst others. Now, in my book, I'm not going to have time to go into the whole argument, but that basically I'm interested in how artworks mimic these symptoms. And this is the counterintuitive idea. I'm saying in this mimicry, they might perform a treatment that is both a remedy and a resistance, and that it's necessary. In the book, my argument really is, I don't know if it is, I can't say it's necessary for all time, but it's certainly necessary within the argument of the book, that to have this kind of ambivalence, because in a neoliberal climate, the therapeutic is often used as a foil to excuse the economically exploitative nature and subjection of all forms of life to the values of the market. And I mean, obviously, there are different kinds of disorders, but many of these are actually, these particular kinds of symptoms derive directly from the incursion of capital into personal life. And these kinds of approaches are increasing. We might even want to think about education itself as being premised on business models. And in conjunction with this increase, notions like wellness and well-being are hailed as aspirational coping mechanisms without there being an address of the actual conditions that are underlying these symptoms. I hope you can still hear me. I'm not sure what's going on with my phone.
Yes, we can still hear you, Maria.
Oh, fantastic, because it's doing all kinds of funny things. Okay, so basically, right, that's the background. So yes, can we have the Mark Fisher slide now? And it's really, there is a lot of writing on that slide. Due to time, I'm not going to read it out exactly, but just to say that the point I want here is that it's a critique of the privatization of stress and So the privatisation of remedies, for instance, in the second paragraph, he's critiquing cognitive behavioural therapy. I'm also sceptical about self-care. It's not that these techniques are not useful, but it is the case that they are bound up with a particular kind of environment, a context in which they're being prescribed as perhaps sticking plasters to cope with a system that's faulty, while also placing responsibility for wellness squarely in the hands of the individual. So I'll leave that slide there for some time so you can read it while I'm going on. So self-care, as I say, has become ubiquitous now in art galleries and institutions. Exhibitions and programs about care. I mean, there's been so many, even before COVID, but now they seem to have increased. However, this term has a long history, at least from the 1960s, and we find it in the philosophical writings of Michel Foucault, and also in, I think we could have the next slide, and also in, I'm just picking out two examples, Foucault and Audre Lorde's literary essays, as well as being a term that was used by various marginalized activist groups in the 60s and 70s. However, its current ubiquity stems from at least three facets of neoliberal ideology. One, the cutting back of funding of social support systems, of social support of welfare, which leaves sectors of the population in dire need of care, and also the transformation of social goods such as education into investments and commodities. Now, in this climate, art is often rallied to fill in the holes in the social fabric and qualify its use value as part of well-being. Now, the second one is also then the stresses, supposed and actual, of being an entrepreneurial or precarious worker in the current labour market. These stresses are sold back to us as necessitating therapies, from shopping to spas, going to the spa. As I said, it's really about individuals are led to believe by the market that they are responsible for their own self-care, and not just the market, by institutions that follow these kinds of values. Catherine Rottenberg gives a good diagnosis. If we could have the next slide, please. I've got a quote by Catherine Rottenberg. She's talking about the neoliberal feminist subject, who she says accepts full responsibility for her own well-being and self-care, thereby disavowing the social, cultural and economic forces that produce inequality. And this is very much contrasts with how self-care was used in collective feminist activist, not just feminist, but activist politics in the 60s and 70s, where self-care was thought in two ways. One, it was a necessity to prevent burnout from activism, because but also it was an act of resistance, a resistance against oppression, and the idea that self-healing as part of a group was necessary to resistance. And this is in contrast to, for example, the movement of #self-care, which was fashioned in 2016 and mainly advocates indulgence in luxury treats and mindfulness, and also combining luxury treats with mindfulness cultures such as meditation, yoga, and the gym, for example. All of these are training techniques that make for better employees and gives us better coping strategies to survive in this neoliberal economy of competitive and flexible work ethos, that we have to be constantly flexible and open to changing plans and reacting to situations. And the third thing is that self-care and well-being have also become part of medical diagnostic terms linked to austerity politics. People are encouraged by GPs, for example, to take care of themselves so as not to be a burden on stripped back medical and social services. And there's kind of a lot of social prescribing, and museums and art therapy fit in here. Yet statistics, and I haven't got there are these statistics easily available, show that there are increases in anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue, etc., as reactions to the very conditions designed to promote the well-being as some kind of achievement. So this is another kind of part of this looping, is that self-care is not just something you do, but it's actually something you achieve. Now, I think I might I have 10 more minutes or not? Or
yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, so because I want to get on to some artists now, I'll just because I knew that would be, you know, time and doing these, everything what I've found working virtually, it means that everything takes longer than it would in offline time. So I just want to, yes, I am coming. So I want to just speak about two artists' work, and I think I'll have the next slide, please. Is the next slide Oriana Fox? Because I can't see the slides, unfortunately.
Yes, it's now Oriana Fox, yes.
Very good. So I'm just going to say something, and then when I come to Oriana Fox, there's about 4 slides, and you can just go through them as you like, actually, while I'm talking. So basically, in my book, I'm not offering a panacea. It's not about art therapy or cures. Instead, I'm exploring a tactics of performativity. And I've taken out theories of performativity. Initially, I was going to talk about that, but I thought that's too much for you know, a 20-minute, 25-minute talk. But so that this tactics of performativity has to do with artworks, not artists necessarily, but artworks as these kind of social objects, that the artworks perform symptoms, that they mimic these symptoms. And in this way, paradoxically, they create a space of resistance because they allow for the toxicity of the system to be acknowledged, as well as, and this is the key thing, as well as played with. And the artwork can maintain a tension, which is difficult for an individual to maintain, a tension between toxicity and play, or, you know, pleasure and pain. But the artwork can do this. Now, this is my thesis. Now, it's hard to substantiate this without showing you moving image works. The two artists that I'm referring to, Oriana Fox and after that, Rahana Zaman. Rahana Fox's work is online. You just have to go on her website. All of her videos from the O show, her chat show, are online. And currently, but you have to be quick, Rahana Zaman's film is on the Whitechapel YouTube channel, because it's part of Artists Film International, but that will be coming down soon. So I would urge you to watch the film in total, because my analysis in terms of Zaman's work really does stem from the formal and emotional aspects of the film. However, just a bit about Oriana Fox first. So Oriana Fox, she does this, it's both live and then it's recorded and then put out online as edited videos. Therapy chat show called the O Show. And for me, this is an example of an artist's work that acts as a remedy or a treatment. I prefer the term treatment of this condition I've been describing, by appearing to subscribe to it. Now, you could read her work. As you can see, she's very, it's about confidence, really. And the chat show is just like the kinds of chat shows you would be familiar with. Now, Oriana Fox would seem to be aligned with the aspirational self and the idea of self-improvement that we're advocated to endure or to engage in neoliberalism. Now, in both her performance and in her so-called real life, she does adhere to a particular kind of therapy called REBT. It's called Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. It was a form of therapy invented in the 1950s by Dr. Albert Ellis. It's got a particular technique called shame attacking, which she advocates on her show. This is a technique that advocates total self-acceptance of yourself, regardless of anything, and also encourages deliberately acting out in the ways that you fear others might judge. Now for Fox, it's about becoming confident. She does suffer from shyness. She talks about this on the show, and she calls this, it's not about being cured of shyness, but it's certainly about becoming more confident through acting out. This is what shame attacking is. She calls it a fake it till you make it production of identity. So that basically the performative speech act, I am confident, is the action that leads to a kind of shifting of the rigid notion, I am shy and nothing will change that. So she mimics confidence. But her goal is not to turn her confidence into an asset to achieve success in terms of the market. She's interested in seeming as if you are aligning yourself with the ethos of the neoliberal feminist subject that I described above previously. But she wants to use the benefits for much more non-normative political ends that are not trapped in a logic of external affirmation of the self, which a lot of our problems in life, I think, do derive from, is that we do need external affirmation, but there's a kind of, it is an ambivalence in the sense that we also need not to over-rely on this. Now, this might be hard to follow, but I think perhaps I'll skip. I just want to say that certain techniques, even mindfulness, can be used in this way. You can subscribe to them, but you can also use them to make changes that are not normative in your life. And this is something I engage in myself, I have to admit. I mean, you know, I do those kinds of things, but it's more about redrawing boundaries between work and leisure and trying to protect myself from the colonization of the mind in cognitive capitalism and actually become perhaps a less productive subject as a resistance. Now, I finally just want to say a few words about Rehana Zaman's film, Sharla, Shabana, Sojourner, Selena. And I have a number of slides because it's got three sequences that are continually being intercut. It's a very fast moving film. And it's the main part is comprised of a series of performance to camera by 6 actresses. You may hopefully be looking at one of those. They're filmed in a very confrontational way. But what's interesting about these performances is that they're partly scripted, partly improvised experiences of sexism and racism. So they're performed in a kind of an acted out way, in the sense that they're part fiction, part fact. But the film takes place in its kind of location outside of these performance to cameras is a beauty salon, of course, a place of self-care treatments. And as the film proceeds, the montage oscillates between these talking heads, performance to cameras, and close-ups of the beauty treatments, which I hope you perhaps are looking at now, pedicures, nail painting, etc. Now, the film is a complex film. It cites lots of other experimental films by women filmmakers. But what I want to claim here in my conclusion is that the way that this film is made and these close-ups, the way it formalizes the body in the beauty treatments, I would claim it doesn't neatly fit into the narrative of using beauty therapy as an indulgent mode of self-care, nor as a coping mechanism in the face of race and gender discrimination that the actresses performatively recount. And yes, the economies of the service industry, of the salon, is an exploitative economy, no doubt. But yet, because of the way the film is crops the bodies, etc., I think it intimates a space that speaks to a network of care between these women of colour rather than self-care. And what you can't hear, of course, is the soundtrack, which plays when the close-ups are on. The soundtrack is like very distant sounds of a tinny radio that might be in the background, and the intermittent sound of women's laughter, but it's gentle echoes in the background. So I think this also adds to a particular space of intimacy, and it preserves pleasure in a kind of off-screen space that intimates something different from self-care as a mode of indulgence. I could just quote Audre Lorde's oft-quoted citation here in relation to resistance and racial and sexual discrimination. She says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." So to conclude then, I'm not saying that that this is, what I'm saying is that what I enjoy about this film, and I think it also happens with Oriana Fox's, certainly the live performances, more maybe than the online videos, is that there's a kind of redistribution of what something that might be called self-care. There are other terms which I use in the book, and I prefer the term self-cultivation, but that could be a whole other talk in itself. And I just want to conclude by saying that what I think these artworks do is that they kind of allow us into a space in which responsibility is not something that is not a calculation, but it's part of being in relation to interdependent others. And I'm proposing that artworks, it's not that they're, in fact, art isn't necessarily good for you at all, but what it can do is enable a toleration, I think, of both harm and remedy, and offer another kind of selfhood than the kind of self that we're interpolated into under neoliberal cognitive capitalism. So that's it in a nutshell. I had to race through that, and I don't know what you're looking at because I can't really see anything on my phone. But I hope that was that the mic was okay.
That was excellent, Maria, and Judy did a very good job of
oh, I'm sure,
joining up the slides. So we did see the Zaman work as you were speaking, and the Oriana Fox. It worked quite well. Yeah. So so thank you very, very much for the talk. I think that I'm very excited that you're working on this topic, Maria, and I look forward to reading your work on it. I wanted to ask something about what you've said around self-care, and if you could just tell us a little bit more about the history of the term self-care. And I was thinking that one of the things that I enjoyed about your book was the way in which that the way in which resistance became a sort of, at times it became a mode of collective resistance. So you talked about people in the audience and what was happening in a group, the spectatorial group, and its engagement with the work of art. And I'm quite interested myself in the relationship between the individual and the collective, and how we can transform individual responsibility and resistance into something that is collective. So my question has to do with your thinking around self-care, and you mentioned 70s feminist collective practices, which brought to mind consciousness raising, and how consciousness raising had always a dual purpose of talking to one another and sort of a knowledge exchange and a support of women. But there was always also an activist aspect to it, that the idea was that we would then go out and make changes, do something that was beyond the group itself, in a sense, into the social realm. And you have the Audre Lorde quote as well, about self-care and the politics of self-care. So I'm interested to know about how you thought about the individual and the collective within your book, and also in relation to your self-care project. If you had anything you'd like to say about that, I would love to hear it.
Yes, well, I suppose, well, one thing is that I'll just say that the book does look at groups, but they're groups that come together in very, not to make the kind of, not to make political change with a capital P, but I guess it's more about the politics of change in the everyday. So it's not like they come together with an agenda, but it's more like a network, in the sense that, I mean, so what I'm saying is that I'm not really looking at collectives. There is certainly feminist consciousness raising. It was part of this kind of self-healing and necessary for activism. So I don't look at activism at all, but I just think what I found interesting, I'm just looking at very, I guess, limited parameters. I'm looking at particular artworks. I'm reluctant to generalize from them out into the wider society, because I think this is, I also think this is a symptom of what we're going, just life today, that one has to kind of put limitations on what one is looking at as a researcher, what one is dealing with generally, because of the kind of globalization, things have become overwhelming. So therefore, collectives can only be have to be thought in different ways and really on the ground. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, so having said that, the one thing that came to mind while you were talking is that there was a slide there of the Oriana Fox production slide, which was an event at Block Gallery in Brixton, and I write about this in the book but what interested me about the event was the discussion afterwards. The audience, of course, this is a gallery audience. I mean, I would say there were quite a lot of students there, and I think it was mainly, it was a mixed audience, but it was mainly, I think, students or other artists who seemed to be willing to speak, and they were sort of coming together in some kind of shared way that was unpredictable. It wasn't predetermined, but the event generated a discussion of how they use what is referred to as mental health services, how they use these as kind of things to be played with, as well as necessities, but also things to play with in relation to their identities. And this was intriguing to me, because also, not just intriguing, it was fascinating, because it seemed to be something that was happening in a practical sense that I was arguing for in a more aesthetic, spectatorial encountering of artworks through my journeys through museums. So I don't know if that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm not, like, there are a lot of collectives who work collectively, but that's not what I'm looking at a kind of, I'm not looking at that kind of intentionality of being a collective, if you see what I mean.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
These networks can occur organically. Now, it's not like they're going to, you know, it's not like the feminist liberation movement or the Black Panthers, which also used the term of self-care. It's not like they're going to, you know, create massive social upheaval, because we're living in a very different time now in this globalized context in which most of the things around us are outside our control. And I think this is why, you know, there is an increase in all kinds of symptoms, because this is not a nice feeling to be living with. I mean, there have always been symptoms, but having been around the university, and before it became a university, and around art colleges, etc., for a long time, people always suffered with symptoms, but not in the way that they are burgeoning now, that really are derived, I think, from everything being accelerated, intensified, and overwhelmingly beyond the control of the individual, yet the individual is supposed to be responsible for their own, well, for everything, really. You have to become an expert in everything and achieve. And I think the idea of some kind of play with that was very interesting to me, to know that this is actually happening on the ground, because I hadn't heard this kind of discussion before of sort of people who were accessing mental health facilities at college were thinking about them in a playful way as well as actually needing them. So there was this kind of ambivalence, but yeah, I mean, I'm just repeating what I'm saying, really.
Yeah.
I'm not
Excellent.
sure.
Thank you.
That's all I can say to address that question.
Yes, no, you did, Maria. I
think on the other hand, I think on the other hand, I'll just finally just add that I guess there's a kind of, I suppose the other thing in the book is that I do look at this philosopher psychiatrist Felix Guattari. Now, again, that was a different time. It was in, you know, the 60s, and I think currently people are looking back to these ideas, but there's a kind of fetishization of the collective. I mean, Judy mentioned earlier this idea that, you know, art is being bandied about as being the thing that's good for you. Also, there's a kind of an idea going around that it's good to be in a collective, or we should all be more collective. But actually, as someone I read recently, which I agree with, is like that if we were all, you know, working collectively, it would create a lot more work, because it was kind of like the idea that, you know, I mean, I've heard people say, oh, let's have lecturers, students, and administrators like using the model. I've heard a number of people say this, using the model that Guattari used in Labor.
Transversality.
In the asylum, as it was referred to then, where there was this kind of like everyone would share roles. But actually, this is another time. In our time, if we were doing that, we would just be working even harder, because we already have to do things beyond the roles that we set out to do in some way. So I think one has to be careful about the collective.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Does anybody else have any questions for Maria? Judy, I don't see any hands up, but I wonder if I'm doing something wrong. Do you see any?
I can't see any hands up, and I can't see any questions in the chat.
Okay.
I think your wee doggy has a question, but apart from
that's
that.
my dog. Sorry about that. Okay.
Well,
I guess I just wanted to say that if you would like, oh, Mo has a question. Thank you, Mo.
Okay, let me just make sure that Mo has got the mic. I will. There we go. Mo, you should be able to talk now.
Yeah, sorry. So, no, thank you. That was really fabulous. And I'm wondering now in the position where I was actually thinking some of these questions that have come up from Joanna's response and obviously from Maria's book about this notion of the neoliberal institution almost causing this situation. And I wondered how, if there would be some response from the speakers this morning about that, because there wasn't much as a way of addressing that, their relation to their actual jobs that they do in the university. Hello?
Yes. Could I just say one line as a response before, while people are maybe thinking about it?
Yes, do.
Just say, yes, I mean, everything I've been speaking about in relation to the university, well, it is to do with where I'm located, which is in this university as a theory lecturer and researcher. I just want to say I feel all of this in my body. That's all. I mean body in relation, body mind, the whole thing. So just to say that really, before. So they're not abstract things to me. That for me, looking at all of this material was a way of trying to deal with experience, in fact, and which does come from, in part, and has been exacerbated by the neoliberal university for sure.
Yeah. I just wanted to add something to that. Well, this morning's speakers, because nobody has put up their hand yet from this morning. There's a wonderful, I put it in the chat, there's a wonderful essay, chapter of a book by Emily Pine, who is an academic in Ireland, and she writes for theatre and she teaches in performance and theatre. And her book is called Notes on Self, and the last chapter is a personal and also political and critique of the university. And she uses her own experience of what she calls depression, but actually reads more like burnout to me, but those two things are very connected. And it's amazing, and it is absolutely about the neoliberal institution and the neoliberal academy, and what it means to be a woman in that space as well. And so if anybody's interested, it's in the chat. It's just a wonderful text, and I actually have it as a PDF. So if you want to email me, I will send it to you. Yeah, I think they're absolutely connected. And as Maria said, some of us do feel it in our bodies. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So any other responses to Mo's question?
I'm not sure that any of this morning's speakers are still in the room with us, so I think we'll have to leave it at that.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd like to say then thank you to all of our presenters, and also to all of the attendees. I thought that it was just an absolutely marvelous event that functioned on many, many levels, both inside and outside of the institution in which we work and in which we are students and staff. So, thank you very, very much for that. And thank you for your time in being here. And Judy, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Nothing more than what you've already said, Jo. Just a really, really great day fabulous to have so many amazing speakers in the room. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I feel like I've got a lot to go away and cogitate off the back of today. So thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks to everybody for speaking.
Okay, Mo, has your hand gone up again? Do you want to say something? No. Mo?
Yeah. Hi. My hand didn't go up again, but I did think it would have been great to bring the two halves together of the day. So I was very disappointed that we couldn't go back to this morning's presenters to actually comment on this relation to, which was Maria's book is about this shift from the individual responsibility, but possibly the institution itself in this care that it is operating, which obviously is fabulous. And I was very grateful for those presentations this morning. But I was all the time thinking during this morning, what about the responsibility of our institution, not just providing the care to help us through, but as Maria is saying, it is perpetuating a cycle of putting us back. And I like Maria's point, the burden on our bodies that we're all feeling as becoming burnt out and then brought back into the institution is going to perpetuate this ongoing cycle of almost being used. You know, so this notion of self-care does take a really pernicious sort of feeling that we all carry within ourselves of being shamed if we are in fact feeling this personally as a burden, rather than the burden is actually knocking it back to the institution. I talk about that all the time as a member of staff and a person looking after particularly PhD students. So it's a pity Amberlee probably couldn't talk about that in relation to her experience as well of caring for students and the responsibility of the institution, which she is actually embodying probably herself, or those people who are there to offer this very obviously very excellent service. But you know, the bigger picture that Maria and the book, and Joanna, thank you for elaborating on that, had a very personal resonance for me about where do we take this, certainly as a feminist and one interested in in the collective, rather than this being this individual burden that of shame almost, can I cope or not. So I would have loved a bit extra to bring that together with this morning's speakers. So obviously they've left the room, but nevertheless, I think we're all left with that individually now to think about, which is absolutely great. It was a brilliant day. Thank you very much.
Okay, Amberlee has actually come back and she said, I think there is a lot to discuss in terms of responsibility. Judy and Mo, you pose a great question. Whose responsibility is our wellness? So I think that there is, a recognition that the responsibility cannot lie only on the individual. And I think Amberlee was making that point in terms of environment. But yes, Mo, you've raised the question of institutional responsibility.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Mo, for raising that point. I think until we heard everybody speak today, we weren't maybe quite so aware of how much tension there would be between the concept of counselling and therapeutic services as an offer that the university makes, and then this environment of toxicity which is perhaps perpetuated by the institution. And one of the things that we really hope to do with the Creative Practices Education and Wellbeing Network is to be very responsive to what it is our membership wants or needs to discuss. So both of the events that we've run to date were very much in response to things which our membership were describing as important to them or necessary to talk about. And I feel like this is a really lovely place to end the event, because I think we've stumbled on the nugget of something which is really well summarised in Amberlee's point. Whose responsibility is the wellness? And maybe, Joe, we should go away and sit with that and think about that being the subject for our next event. So really being able to unpick that tension between wellness as the responsibility of the individual and illness or lack of well-being as a response to a toxic environment or the space in which we're operating. I think that's a really exciting space for us to be thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your time. And hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.